Welcome to TGIF. Well, it's good to have you back.
It is good to be back. I do not like missing church, and especially, I love you all, but I really miss the kids when I'm gone. But I had a great trip, but one thing that I am reminded, it is complicated to travel during COVID. It's just a bit more exhausting. Although the trip was great, when I got home, I was ready to sleep. I slept 11 hours. I don't even think I rolled over, and I thought, well, if I get a good night's rest, I'll be refreshed the next morning.
Well, that takes us to our word of the day, which is renewed.
Refreshed, renewed, are they the same?
Are they the same? And I think that's what we have been working on this week as well, trying to think through this. And so we have two translations for them today. So we're going to each read one. I'm going to read Psalm 23, verse 3 from the NIV. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right path for his name's sake.
And the NLT version, he renews my strength. He guides me along right paths, bringing honor to his name.
Yeah, I really like, we see both of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Refresh and renew. But we also see strength and soul. And I thought that was interesting too, that sometimes I think anytime we use the word strength, we think, what can I lift? What can I move with my own strength? And it's really making the connection for the psalmist here between the strength and the soul, how they are really intertwined together, but how God is the one that provides that strength, provides our soul, and refreshes and renews. And so I think that we live in a culture and a time when it is just everything, there's just so much to do.
Overload.
Our to-do lists are crazy some days. And I think that there's moments when I know you all have those days where it's just like a doctor appointment here or a kid appointment there or a series of appointments. And then there's always making sure the bills are all paid. And you just go down the list that the day becomes just this task-oriented blur. And we were not designed like that. We were not designed by God to be those kind of people. But we get caught up in it, don't we? And I think that that's what's hard. But it's at that moment when, for me, I realize that's where the struggle begins. Because what we're really talking about is our alignment with God, and as opposed to our alignment with the world, and how we connect with God on a daily basis, doing our devotionals, reading our scriptures, all important stuff. But it's throughout the day staying connected with God and making sure that we are aligned with God, so that when the pressure comes on, we don't explode on somebody in a situation. And it's hard because there's a lot of pressures put on us. And so I think that Psalm 23 is interesting in itself, but for the people, the context, then they would have been making this connection with sheep and the shepherd. I think that's what is neat to play into this, because having raised sheep, we understand the importance that we got to make sure the sheep are fed, we got to make sure they have water, they got to have a shelter, and that they're protected, because sheep with no shepherd, unprotected, will not last very long. And in the wild, that was very real for the people of the ancient people. And so they knew that the shepherd was an integral part. The shepherd kept the sheep alive. And so I think that for us, understanding context, it is God that keeps us alive each and every day.
And Psalm 23 is a psalm of living.
Where do we hear that, though?
Funerals.
Funerals. We often hear it at funerals, and the reason I think that we get emotionally attached to it at funerals often is for the person who died. And that's not the reality, though. I think people connect that, okay, they went through the valley, they lost their life, but now they're going to these green fields and pastures, and everything will be happily ever after. And while there is context in there that we can unpack and develop, and we will a little bit later, I think it's important to understand that this was meant for the living. This psalm, this is, David trying to pour into us, and the psalmist is really trying to ignite us to why we are living, why we are here, that God created us to be alive and to be in alignment with.
And that's the intent of the psalm, but often read at funerals, or maybe that's what we go to when we're really having a hard time, when everything about this psalm should empower you and give you hope in these daily activities to refresh, to restore.
But peace and tranquility is what I want, right? You were talking about that just the other day.
That's right. I kind of find that when, at the end of the day, when you say you've had a good day, usually you look back and everything either went your way or it went as predicted. But we know in this life we're going to have troubles. We're told that.
Yeah.
It's not a surprise. And when we have a hard day, that's when we classify it as a bad day. So with God, we know that He is present in the midst of everything. With this concept of renewed and refreshed, shouldn't that help us look at our problems differently and process our problems?
Especially when they pile up upon us. It doesn't mean the troubles go away, but you've got to know how to attack them when they are basically attacking you. And some of it we bring upon ourselves because we pack our schedules so full. But there's this idea of that renewing, and how does renewing or refreshing of my soul take place in the midst of too much on my plate?
And I think sometimes we think we're going to renew or refresh. I was just talking to a friend this week, and in a situation, she was wanting to fix the situation for her child. Well, you can't fix a situation. It's only God who intervenes in that. He renews and He restores. We can't do that for each other.
Exactly, yeah. We found that definition of renew. It's to resume an activity after an interruption. And I really thought that for me, that connects, because I can just see that in a day where I get a schedule and things start going wrong. I did my devotions in the morning, I was reading my scriptures in the morning, and then through a series of events, all of a sudden, my activity with God is interrupted. It's like my connection with God somehow gets interrupted by the things that go wrong. And so to resume, which what is done by God, God's calling us to resume and be a part, that is God's activity, but it's like, I think we struggle with that.
I think often we get stuck in that interruption, and that's why we stay in that place of whether it be anger, sadness, impatient, wherever we're at, when we're called to allow God to renew us and to refresh us.
This really should be our go-to verse in everything. I mean, in the daily living, when it just becomes too overwhelming, that this is your go-to verse, and that it reminds us that God is the one who renews our strength. He is the one who refreshes our soul. So it's sometimes taking a deep breath and not exploding on somebody, and taking that opportunity to really reflect on, okay, God, I need you to renew me right now. This interruption that happened, I need to now figure out what you need me to say in this space.
And is it easy in the midst of, there are stressful situations and there are times of exhaustion. It's easy to say, it's not easy to do, but that's why it's a daily walk, that realigning with God.
Like we said, we were not designed by God to live that way in total exhaustion or all stressed out. And I often think that if you're doing that and you're doing it well, because I think we figured out some things on it, but we still find ourselves exhausted. But maybe if you're having a good day and things are going well and you're really aligned with God just perfectly, maybe that's the day you need to be looking around for other people that are exhausted, trying to understand why are the people. I often come across that in the life of the church, the leadership. They're just totally exhausted. And so I have to start asking questions about, okay, so why are you exhausted, and what is the cause of this? And so looking around and listening to other people to understand why there's so much exhaustion in this world. And I think it's when we get out of line, when there's been an interruption with our relationship with God.
And when you come across someone and you're having conversation and you hear their story where you're thinking, wow, you're just, wow, but they're coming from a refreshed, renewed way in telling it, that is uplifting. That's why it's so important to share your story, not just share your problems just to air them, but to see how God can use other people to help pour into you. This weekend, this conference that I was at was a leadership conference, but it was really an amazing women's retreat, because that's exactly what we were doing, is that opportunity to be refreshed and renewed. God was doing that, but using people and the stories to do it. And we need to pour into people like that. We need to listen, we need to share, but we need to listen too.
And Psalm 23 is 6 verses. It's not a massive amount of scripture. It's 6 verses that reminds us of the love God has for all his children.
So I'm going to read it. You've probably read it before, but I want you to read it and receive it as a psalm for the living, and to be used as a daily psalm through our troubles and the stressful situations we find ourselves in. So receive it this way. The Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need. He lets me rest in green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams. He renews my strength. He guides me along right paths, bringing honor to his name. Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me. Your rod and your staff protect and comfort me. You prepare a feast for me in the presence of my enemies. You honor me by anointing my head with oil. My cup overflows with blessings. Surely your goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord forever.
I love how God's love is going to pursue you forever. I mean, God's love is after you. God's love is reaching for you, and that there's this complete picture there that you will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. But there's a little caveat before that, huh? It's talking about the cup.
That cup. So your question today, this week, is how full is your cup? This says overflowing with blessings. But we've all heard the analogy, is your cup half full or half empty? Well, God tells us it's overflowing with blessings, so that's something that you have to look to find, because we can easily find loaded up with troubles. We can fill our cup with troubles. We have a lot to do and a lot on our list. But how are you allowing God to renew and to refresh you each and every day so that you can read this psalm and receive this psalm in the living context with the intent that it was, that God's got this all figured out. He is the shepherd. He will keep us alive. So go forth this week knowing that you are loved by God and He is enough. See you next time. Bye.